On November 16th, 1881, 3 weeks after the shootout known as the Gunfight at the OK Corral, Wyatt Earp testified during the preliminary hearing headed by Judge Wells Spicer. Wyatt Earp was the first witness for the defense. The preliminary hearing had begun on October 31st, and a number of witnesses had already testified for the prosecution, including Ike Clanton and Sheriff Johnny Behan. Since November the 7th, Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday had been arrested and lodged in the nearby jail. At first, Wyatt Earp answered a series of questions: his name and age, where he was born, where he lived, what his business was, and finally he was told, "Give any explanations you may think proper of the circumstances appearing in the testimony against you, and state any facts which you think will tend to your exculpation." Wyatt testified that the difficulty which resulted in the death of William Clanton and Frank McLaury originated last spring. Over a year ago, Wyatt Earp, with his brothers Virgil and Morgan, Marshal Williams, Captain Hurst, and 4 soldiers, were on the trail of 6 government mules stolen from Camp Rucker. Wyatt and the posse traced the mules to the McLaury ranch. According to Wyatt, they had followed the trail of Tom and Frank McLaury. At the ranch, a deal was made with a man named Frank Patterson that the mules would later be returned to the military. They never were. Wyatt then described the chain of events that would lead to the conflict with Ike Clanton and the outlaws known as the Cowboys.
About 1 month after we had followed up those mules, I met Frank and Tom McLaury in Charleston. They tried to pick a fuss out of me down there and told me if I ever followed them up again as close as I did before, they would kill me. Shortly after the time Bud Philpott was killed by the men who tried to rob the Benson stage, as a detective working for Wells Fargo and Company, I helped trace the matter up, and I was satisfied that 3 men named Billy Leonard, Harry Head, and James Crane were in that robbery. I knew that Leonard, Head, and Crane were friends and associates of the Clantons and McLaurys and often stopped at their ranches. It was generally understood among officers and those who have information about criminals that Ike Clanton was sort of chief among the Cowboys, that the Clantons and McLaurys were cattle thieves and generally in the secret of the stage robbery, and that the Clanton and McLaury ranches were meeting places and places of shelter for the gang. I had an ambition to be sheriff of this county at the next election, and I thought it would be a great help to me with the people and the businessmen if I could capture the men who killed Philpott. There were rewards offered of about $1,200 each for the capture of the robbers. Altogether, there was about $3,600 offered for their capture. I thought this sum might tempt Ike Clanton and Frank McLaury to give away Leonard, Head, and Crane, so I went to Ike Clanton, Frank McLaury, and Joe Hill when they came to town. I had an interview with them in the backyard of the Oriental Saloon. I told them what I wanted. I told them I wanted the glory of capturing Leonard, Head, and Crane, and if I could do it, it would help me make the race for sheriff at the next election. I told them if they would put me on the track of Leonard, Head, and Crane, and tell me where those men were hid, I would give them all the reward and would never let anyone know where I got the information. Ike Clanton said he would like to see them captured. He said that Leonard claimed a ranch that he claimed, and that if he could get him out of the way, he would have no opposition in regard to the ranch. Clanton said that Leonard, Head, and Crane would make a fight, that they would never be taken alive, and that I must find out if the reward would be paid for the capture of the robbers dead or alive. I then went to Marshal Williams, the agent of Wells Fargo and Company in this town, and at my request he telegraphed to the agent or superintendent in San Francisco to find out if the reward would be paid for the robbers dead or alive. He received, in June 1881, a telegram which he showed me promising the reward would be paid, dead or alive. The next day I met Ike Clanton and Joe Hill on Allen Street in front of a little cigar store next to the Alhambra. I told them that the dispatch had come. I went to Marshal Williams and told him I wanted to see the dispatch for a few minutes. He went to look for it and could not find it, but went over to the telegraph office and got a copy of it, and he came back and gave it to me. I went and showed it to Ike Clanton and Joe Hill, and returned it to Marshal Williams, and afterwards told Frank McLaury of its contents. It was then agreed between us that they were to have all the $3,600 reward outside of necessary expenses for horse hire and going after them, and that Joe Hill should go to where Leonard, Head, and Crane were hid over near Wairika in New Mexico, and lure them in near Frank and Tom McLaury's ranch near Soldiers' Holes, 30 miles from here, and I would be on hand with a posse and capture them. I asked Joe Hill, Ike Clanton, and Frank McLaury what tale they would make them to get them over here. They said they had agreed upon a plan to tell them there would be a paymaster going from Tombstone to Bisbee to pay off the miners, and they wanted them to come in and take him in. Ike Clanton then sent Joe Hill to bring them in. Before starting, Joe Hill took off his watch and chain and between $200 and $300 in money and gave it to Virgil Earp to keep for him until he got back. He was gone about 10 days and returned with the word that he got there a day too late, that Leonard and Harry Head had been killed the day before he got there by horse thieves. I learned afterward that the thieves had been killed subsequently by members of the Clanton and McLaury gang. After that, Ike Clanton and Frank McLaury claimed that I had given them away to Marshal Williams and Doc Holliday, and when they came in town, they shunned us, and Morgan, Virgil Earp, Doc Holliday, and myself began to hear their threats against us. I am a friend of Doc Holliday because when I was city marshal of Dodge City, Kansas, he came to my rescue and saved my life when I was surrounded by desperadoes. About a month or more ago, October 1881, Morgan Earp and myself assisted to arrest Stillwell and Spence on the charge of robbing the Bisbee stage. The McLaurys and Clantons were always friendly with Spence and Stillwell, and they laid the whole blame of their arrest on us, though the fact is we only went as a sheriff's posse. After we got in town with Spence and Stillwell, Ike Clanton and Frank McLaury came in. Frank McLaury took Morgan Earp into the street in front of the Alhambra, where John Ringo, Ike Clanton, and the two Hicks boys were also standing. Frank McLaury commenced to abuse Morgan Earp for going after Spence and Stillwell. Frank McLaury said he would never speak to Spence again for being arrested by us. He said to Morgan, "If you ever come after me, you will never take me." Morgan replied that if he ever had occasion to go after him, he would arrest him. Frank McLaury then said to Morgan Earp, "I have threatened you boys' lives, and a few days later I had taken it back, but since this arrest, it now goes." Morgan made no reply and walked off. Before this, and after this, Marshal Williams, Farmer Daly, Ed Barnes, Old Man Urides, Charlie Smith, and 3 or 4 others had told us at different times of threats to kill us by Ike Clanton, Frank McLaury, Tom McLaury, Joe Hill, and John Ringo. I knew all these men were desperate and dangerous men, that they were connected with outlaws, cattle thieves, robbers, and murderers. I knew of the McLaurys stealing 6 government mules and also cattle, and when the owners went after them, finding his stock on the McLaurys' ranch, that he was drove off and told that if he ever said anything about it, he would be killed. And he kept his mouth shut until several days ago, for fear of being killed. I heard of John Ringo shooting a man down in cold blood near Camp Thomas. I was satisfied that Frank and Tom McLaury killed and robbed Mexicans in Skeleton Canyon about 3 or 4 months ago, and I naturally kept my eyes open and did not intend that any of the gang should get the drop on me if I could help it. Ike Clanton met me at the Alhambra 5 or 6 weeks ago and told me I had told Holliday about this transaction concerning the capture of Head, Leonard, and Crane. I told him I had never told Holliday anything. I told him when Holliday came up from Tucson I would prove it. Ike said that Holliday had told him so. When Holliday came back, I asked him if he said so. On the night of the 25th of October, Holliday met Ike Clanton in the Alhambra saloon and asked him about it. Clanton denied it. They quarreled for 3 or 4 minutes. Holliday told Clanton he was a damned liar if he said so. I was sitting eating lunch at the lunch counter. Morgan Earp was standing at the Alhambra bar talking with the bartender. I called him over to where I was sitting, knowing that he was an officer, and told him that Holliday and Clanton were quarreling in the lunchroom and for him to go in and stop it. He climbed over the lunchroom counter from the Alhambra bar and went into the room, took Holliday by the arm, and led him into the street. Ike Clanton in a few seconds followed them out. I got through eating and walked out of the bar. As I stopped at the door of the bar, they were still quarreling. Just then Virgil Earp came up, I think out of the Occidental, and told them, Holliday and Clanton, if they didn't stop their quarreling, he would have to arrest them. They all separated at that time, Morgan Earp going down the street to the Oriental Saloon, Ike going across the street to the Grand Hotel. I walked in the Eagle Brewery where I had a faro game which I had not closed. I stayed in there for a few minutes and walked out to the street, and there met Ike Clanton. He asked me if I would take a walk with him, that he wanted to talk to me. I told him I would if he did not go too far, as I was waiting for my game in the brewery to close, and I would have to take care of the money. We walked about halfway down the brewery building, going down 5th Street, and stopped. He told me when Holliday approached him in the Alhambra that he wasn't fixed just right. He said that in the morning he would have man for man, that this fighting talk had been going on for a long time, and he guessed it was about time to fetch it to a close. I told him I would not fight no one if I could get away from it, because there was no money in it. He walked off and left me, saying, "I will be ready for you in the morning." I walked over to the Oriental. He followed me in and took a drink, having his 6-shooter in plain sight. He says, "You must not think I won't be after you all in the morning." He said he would like to make a fight with Holliday now. I told him Holliday did not want to fight, but only to satisfy him that this talk had not been made. About that time, the man that is dealing my game closed it and brought the money to me. I locked it in the safe and started home. I met Holliday on the street between the Oriental and Alhambra. Myself and Holliday walked down Allen Street, he going to his room and I to my house, going to bed.
Here's some notes concerning the events mentioned in Wyatt Earp's testimony. The stolen mules. The 6 government mules were stolen from Camp Rucker on July 21st, 1880. Camp Rucker was a small fort located in Cochise County, east of Tombstone. Many in the area believed that Curly Bill Brocious, Zwing Hunt, and Sherman McMasters were behind the theft. A group of cavalry, led by Lieutenant Hurst, went to Tombstone looking for help in finding the missing mules. At Tombstone, Virgil, Wyatt, and Morgan Earp joined the posse. Wyatt discovered the stolen mules at the McLaury Ranch, with the brand DS covering the US brand. Lieutenant Hurst did not want to make trouble with the local civilian ranchers, and so he tried to reach a compromise. The compromise did not work. Hurst would later publish a reward in the Epitaph newspaper for the capture and conviction of the thieves. He also said that the mules had been seen at the McLaury Ranch. Frank McLaury would respond in an article in the Daily Nugget newspaper, denying any wrongdoing and insulting the character of Lieutenant Hurst. The Benson stage attacked. On the evening of March 15th, 1881, a stagecoach traveling from Tombstone to Benson was attacked by bandits. The stagecoach was driven by Eli Philpott, known as Bud Philpott, with Robert Paul riding as shotgun. The stagecoach was also carrying $26,000 worth of silver bullion. A number of passengers were inside the stagecoach, with another passenger, Peter Rohrig, riding on top of the stagecoach behind the driver and shotgun messenger. On the way to Drew's station, the bandits stood on the road, shouting for the stagecoach to stop. Robert Paul yelled, "I hold for no man," and fired his shotgun at the bandits. The bandits fired several shots at the stagecoach. Bud Philpott and Peter Rohrig were both hit. Philpott fell forward, dead, his body falling to the ground. Roehrig was mortally wounded and would die soon after. A posse, led by Sheriff Behan, was organized to search for the bandits. The posse included Wyatt, Virgil, and Morgan Earp, Robert Paul, Bat Masterson, and Marshall Williams. The posse followed the bandits' trail to a ranch, where they discovered a man named Luther King. King admitted that he was involved in the stagecoach holdup, taking care of the horses, while Billy Leonard, James Crane, and Harry Head attempted to stop the stagecoach. Leonard, Head, and Crane were the ones who killed Bud Philpott and Peter Roehrig. Doc Holliday was accused of being one of the bandits, but was released for lack of evidence. Leonard, Head, and Crane. So, what happened to Leonard, Head, and Crane? All three would die within the year. Bill Leonard began trouble with the Hazlitt brothers, Ike and Bill Hazlitt. Leonard wanted their ranch and planned to kill the brothers with Harry Head. On June 10th, 1881, the Hazlitt brothers ambushed Leonard and Head, killing them. James Crane, along with other members of the Cowboys, then killed the Hazlitt brothers. James Crane would be killed on August 12, 1881, along with Old Man Clanton when they were ambushed by a group of Mexicans. The ambush is known as the Guadalupe Canyon Massacre. Bisbee stage robbery. On September 8, 1881, a stagecoach headed to Bisbee was robbed by two bandits. The stagecoach was known as the Sandy Bob, which was the nickname of the man who founded the stagecoach line, Robert Crouch. There was no strong box on the stagecoach, and so the masked bandits robbed the passengers of their valuables. Frank Stillwell and Pete Spence became suspects. Their voices had been recognized, along with boot prints that matched Frank Stillwell's boots. The charges against Stillwell and Spence would be dropped due to lack of evidence and alibis provided by several people. John Ringo shooting a man near Camp Thomas. In his testimony, Wyatt Earp stated, "I heard of John Ringo shooting a man down in cold blood near Camp Thomas." In 1879, Johnny Ringo shot and wounded Lewis Hancock in a saloon in Safford, Arizona. Ringo had offered Hancock a drink in the saloon. Hancock refused. Ringo responded by shooting and wounding him in the neck. Hancock recovered, the wound being minor. Safford, Arizona, and Camp Thomas are located near each other in Graham County, Arizona. Mexicans robbed and killed in Skeleton Canyon. In his testimony, Wyatt Earp stated, "I was satisfied that Frank and Tom McLaury killed and robbed Mexicans in Skeleton Canyon about 3 or 4 months ago. Skeleton Canyon is situated 30 miles northeast of Douglas, Arizona. There are actually 2 massacres associated with the Cowboys and Skeleton Canyon. In July 1879, after committing raids into Mexico, a group of rurales, the Federal Corps of Rural Police in Mexico, followed the Cowboys into Skeleton Canyon. The Cowboys ambushed the rurales in the canyon, killing the majority. Only 3 survived. The event at Skeleton Canyon that Wyatt Earp was referring to happened on July 27th, 1881. Curly Bill Brocious, along with other cowboys, ambushed a group of Mexican smugglers who were transporting silver through Skeleton Canyon. 4 of the smugglers were killed.